Hi, welcome to the Penguin Post newspaper Viking. I am Tori.
Hi, Tori. Hi there.
I'm Carmen.
Hi, Carmen. You can call me Andy.
Okay.
Today we're interviewing Professor Andrew Gordon. He researches different things pertaining to forests. Let's ask him some questions.
Could you please tell us more about your work?
Sure. So I live up here in Canada. That's the country up above you. And I used to work at a place called the University of Guelph. That's pretty close to Toronto, where the Toronto Raptors are from. Now I'm retired. I live about 2.5 hours north of there, but I spent about almost 35 years at the University of Guelph looking at trees. And I looked at them in two different ways. So I don't know if any of you have been to Ontario or not, but in the southern part of Ontario, there's a lot of agricultural land, and a lot of the original trees that were there were all cut down by the pioneers and settlers to make way for farm fields. And because some of our farming practices aren't very good, there's a lot of soil erosion and associated problems. And so part of my work was looking at how you could reintroduce trees onto the farming landscape and yet still be able to farm. That's something that we call agroforestry. That's a big fancy term. It just means farming with trees. The other part of my research, maybe I won't talk about that today, involves natural forests. And in the northern part of our province, we have vast square miles, square kilometers of natural forest. And I was very interested in understanding how these forests acted as habitat for animals and how they dealt with different types of rainfall amounts and how fast they grew and things like that.
Where can we learn about what trees are good to plant in different climate zones?
Oh, that's a very good question. Of course, trees that grow very well in California might not grow very well in Ontario, but most forestry libraries, so if you go to a university that has a forestry school associated with it, they'll have lots of books on forests and trees. And oftentimes in those books, they will tell you what trees are the best to be planted in California or Florida or Ontario or other parts of the United States or Canada. Every tree species has what's known as a natural range. That's the area in which it likes to grow the best. So out in California, you have areas that are very suitable for growing certain types of trees. And here in Ontario, we have areas that are very suitable for growing different types of trees.
How did you get interested in studying about forests?
Well, that's a long story. So I grew up in a place called Sault Ste. Marie. That's right on the US border. And in fact, across the river in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, there was a smaller version of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And my dad was a research scientist with the Ontario government stationed in Sault Ste. Marie, and he was a forester. And so from the time I could walk, he was always talking to me about trees and how nice it was to plant trees and to grow trees and things like that. And so I guess it just sort of wore off on me. And so when I graduated from high school, I decided to go into forestry school. So I went all the way to the east coast of Canada to the University of New Brunswick, and I studied there for 5 years. And then I came back to Ontario and I worked as a forester for a year. And then I actually moved to your country. I moved all the way up to Alaska, to Fairbanks, Alaska, and I studied trees more up there for another 5 years. And so it's been a real learning experience for me, and there's still lots to learn about trees.
What are some good types of trees to plant where you live?
Where I live, the types of trees, we have quite a number of trees, not as many as you would have in California, but we have a tree here that you might have heard of. It's called the sugar maple tree. And when it gets old, it produces maple syrup. You know, maple syrup that you put on your pancakes?
Mhm.
Not the fake stuff like Aunt Jemima, but the real true blue maple syrup. And so in Southern Ontario, where we don't have many trees, that's a very good tree to plant. But there are many different types of trees where we live that we can plant. We have what are known as hardwood trees. They're like sugar maples. They're like trees that lose their leaves in the wintertime. Maybe you don't have too many of those in California. And then we also have what are known as evergreens. Those are trees that hold on to their needles all year long, like spruce trees and pine trees, what we make Christmas trees from.
Cool. We have been learning about the carbon footprint calculator. Is there a way to calculate how much carbon a tree absorbs as it grows?
Sure, there is. It might be a little bit complicated, but it is possible to do that because trees take up carbon dioxide from the air and they store it in carbon compounds as part of their bark and their bole, which is the wooden part of the tree. And so it is possible to calculate, going through some fairly simple formulas, how much carbon dioxide a tree takes up and how much carbon dioxide is stored in a tree. And so you can actually figure out on an acre basis how many trees you might have to plant in order to offset, say, the carbon emissions of some different types of vehicles.
What role do trees and soil play in a healthy ecosystem?
Oh, that's very important because soils and trees are very closely related. Trees, of course, need to have soils in which to put their roots down into. That's where they get their nutrients and their water from. But every year, even if you are a coniferous tree or an evergreen tree, you would shed some of your needles. And if you were a deciduous tree or a hardwood tree, you would shed all of your leaves. And those leaves fall out of the tree and they land on the soil. And then they're decomposed by all sorts of different types of organisms, bacteria and fungi that live in the soil. And so all the material that's was originally in a leaf ultimately becomes incorporated into the soil. And soils are very, very, very good reserves for carbon. They can accumulate an awful lot of carbon in the soil. And so the healthy relationship between trees and soils is very good. And so that's why when we have bad forestry practices or bad agricultural practices and we get a lot of soil erosion, that's not a good thing. We'd like to be able to keep the trees on the landscape so that we can continue to keep the relationship strong between soils and trees.
What is your favorite rehabilitation project and where is it located?
Okay, so like I said, I used to live in Southern Ontario, a town called Guelph. And if you drive around the area around Guelph and look at all the farm fields, you'll see that oftentimes the farmers have removed a lot of trees from the banks of streams. And as a result, there's a lot of erosion into streams and there's a lot of sediment. The fish have a hard time living there. The water temperatures heat up. And so many years ago in 1985, myself and some colleagues, we took about a 2-kilometer section, that'd be about 1.5 miles, of a little stream called Washington Creek. It was probably no more than 2 meters wide. And we planted trees all along the sides of it. And we watched them grow for the next 30 years or so until they were so big that they finally touched their branches over top of the stream. That reduced the stream temperature and the tree roots along the banks of the trees stabilized the stream banks so there's no more erosion. So it was a very, very nice rehabilitation project. It was at a little place called Washington Creek.
What can people do to start rehabiting deforests and areas in their own community?
Well, of course, the simple answer is to plant trees. It's never too late to plant a tree. You don't see the results immediately. The trees have to grow and develop the root systems, and they have to develop healthy crowns so that the crowns will produce what we refer to as litter fall. That's simply the leaves that fall out of the trees every year. Oops, somebody disappeared there. There you are. And so, sure, tree planting is a very good exercise. It can be done in urban areas and suburban areas and abandoned lots. It's very important to work with the authorities, the city authorities, to make sure you know who owns the land and to make sure the landowner is receptive to having trees planted there. And then, of course, one of your previous questions was, how do we know which trees grow best on what type of area or what type of soil? And so you would like to work with a professional forester or a professional soils person who could go to the area, maybe sample some of the soils, and then give you a recommendation as to which type of tree might be the best one to plant, and what density might be very important to understand as well. So when you plant trees, you could plant them really far apart, like 20 feet, or you could plant them really close together, 2 or 3 feet. And different trees like to be planted at different densities. So it'll be important, once you understand what's the perfect tree for the perfect site, what density of tree do you have to plant at?
I'm working on making a tree planting game/app. The main idea here is to motivate people to plant trees. The app user can share a video of themselves planting seeds of trees in their part of the world, so others can be inspired to do the same. What are 3 of the main challenges that you think I should state in my game? What are some solutions for these challenges? Do you have any suggestions of what I could add to my game?
Well, that's a great idea to develop a game like that, and a great idea if you can bring it and develop it into an app as well too. So I've seen all sorts of tree games, as we call them, tree planting games. Some of them are board games where you roll the dice and you move along a board basically, and then you land on a square and it tells you something to do. Gather some information from your local forester or something like that. So I'm not sure I can give you any advice on what to include or not to include. It just sounds like a great idea. I would encourage you to, as you develop your game, to make sure you talk to relevant people in your geographical area that are knowledgeable about soils and trees, just so you get the right mix of trees and soils and things like that. So what do you think would encourage a person to plant a tree? If you decided to have a meeting in your neighborhood and invited 20 people over, all the way from teenagers to moms and dads, what do you think would encourage them to plant trees? Do you think if you said to them, you should plant a tree because it's really good for the environment, it's going to sequester carbon and improve the soils, do you think a lot of those people might be interested in doing it?
Maybe.
Maybe. Nowadays, everybody's interested in climate change and the environment, so you might get some there. Other people, believe it or not, don't like trees as much as you or I, and so you might have to give them a bit of an incentive. So you could say to them, if you plant a tree, we'll give you $5. Is that enough for you to convince you to plant a tree? And they might say, yeah, that's enough. And then you would give them $5 and they would plant a tree. The problem is, of course, where do you get the $5 from? So you have to be thinking about maybe talking to some of your local politicians to see if they would put a little pool or a pot of money aside that you could encourage people to learn about trees and to plant trees.
Thank you so much for joining. We love talking with you. Bye.
That was great. Bye. That was great to hear from you. I hope you don't get any snow in California or Florida, but we have lots of snow up here and we like it. So you take care of yourselves and keep working on trees because it's really, really, really important. And if you get that game working and that app working, make sure you send me a copy, okay?
Okay. Bye.
Okay, see you later. Have a good one.